Hello everyone, I'm George from BBF. We're here at Marco Polo, and today I'm joined by Jonas from UHA Architects. We'll be talking about how we bring big ideas to life, from projects like this to big scale developments. So, welcome to BBF TV channel. We have today with us Jonas, the CEO of a very well-known architectural firm. It's my privilege to have you today with me, and let's go through some questions about who you are, and just for the people as well who first time seeing you. So tell us a bit more about you.
So my name is Jonas Upton-Hansen. I'm a Danish architect. I founded UHA, who obviously, as you know, we've done a number of projects with you. A little bit about myself, I guess we could go back to almost my childhood and kind of go through the journey of how I became an architect and how I chose architecture and my progression through the architectural career that I've had to date. I was born in Denmark, and the first house I grew up in Denmark was designed by a very famous Danish architect called Jorn Utzon, who's actually the architect who did the Sydney Opera House. And he designed a housing project in Denmark, which was very much based on a socialistic ideal of community. There were small houses for the working class, and they were designed very much around a Japanese principle of open plan, and you had your own little courtyard, and then you had a public garden that everybody worked in to maintain, that became sort of this communal green space that you shared with your fellow residents. And you'll see that once we start actually talking about some of the projects that we've done later, some of these ideas start to permeate. And I think through my career as an architect, a lot of the things that I had in my childhood, or that I lived, or that I experienced around the world, sort of come through in my designs, even sometimes me not realizing where it comes from. But I grew up in this house, and I got to actually meet this architect. And my mom used to tell me, this is a very famous architect. It's Mr. Jorn Utzon. And he would just ride by on his bike. It'd be very kind of casual. And I remember, wow, this is a big man. So from a very early age, I already knew that I was looking up to this man who had designed beautiful projects around Denmark. My parents took me to see one of the churches that he's designed, Bauswerk Church, which was a beautiful project. And so I come from a little bit of a family, I would say, not architects. All my family were engineers. So no architects, no artists in the family, but my family had an appreciation for architecture. Then I moved to the south of France when I was 7. My family moved. My father got relocated with his job. I was lucky enough to grow up in the south of France on the Riviera there, in a little village where I went to a tiny little school in the mountains, where they really kind of forced on you of drawing and painting and creativity. And this was the place where the most famous artists in the world had congregated and painted. You had Matisse, you had Chagall, and lived in the village where I grew up in the south of France. Picasso, Braque, all of these. I had a lot of artistic influence on me. So when I got to college or university, my dream was actually to become an artist, because I was so influenced by that. But I think my parents were a little bit like, ooh, artist, that's a difficult career choice. And we see you're very pragmatic, you're pretty good at math, you're pretty good at kind of, organizing stuff. How about architecture? And I said, oh yeah, maybe architecture. So I went into architecture. I studied architecture at the Architectural Association in London, which is one of the oldest architecture, actually the oldest architecture school in London. It's a very prestigious university. It's a very liberal university where they like to really push you. It's where a lot of the famous Zaha Hadid went there, Richard Rogers went there. A lot of very famous architects have gone there. So they push you very, very hard. After university, my first job was with Norman Foster.
Very well known architectural firm.
Yes, in London, where I actually got hired there to work on the Monaco Yacht Club. And they hired me, I think, because I spoke French. I'd grown up in that area, so I could be helpful in that aspect. And I worked on that for a little bit. Then the job went on hold. It was a very long-term job. It took 10 years actually to deliver that job. But then I got transferred to the McLaren Center of Technology, which was the McLaren headquarters in Woking, where I was stationed on site. And there on site, I learned really by doing. I was surrounded by some of the best craftsmen in the world. You had Ron Dennis walking around site, kind of telling us this tile is not straight and this is not this. And we're building huge wind tunnels to test cars. It was like an architectural laboratory. It's an incredible project for me to start on. So that really gave me kind of the first step in my architectural career. Then I decided to move to the States. And it wasn't really a career choice. It was I met my wife, was American and had taken up a job in Chicago. So I moved to Chicago, which I was excited about because it's the birthplace of the skyscraper. The high-rise towers was actually born. There was a race between sort of Chicago and New York in kind of the first high-rise there, Daniel Burnham and some of these very famous architects that really pioneered high-rise structure. So I went there and worked for a famous architect called Helmut Jahn, a German architect who has built all over the world. He built the Sony Center, the Post Tower. He's done a lot of famous buildings around the world. And I worked there for 6 years. And it was a huge learning experience for me. I got to work on a series of high-rise, one in New York City, 50 West Street. That became a big success there. I worked on a high-rise in Chicago and a series of buildings around the world. And after gaining experience and having about 10 years of experience, I decided I wanted to try to set up my own studio. And for that, I felt that London was a good base to come back to. And why London? Because it's very central. A lot of people come there. A lot of people like to come there. And you could deal with America, you could deal with Asia. It was kind of really well positioned in between. So that's how it really started. And I set up UHA in 2011. And it was really just me, and my wife was helping me at the time, and we were working out of our kitchen. And we really grew it from there. And now UHA has 7 offices around the world. Still headquartered in London, but we have an office in Lisbon, we have a big office in Budapest, we have a small office here in Limassol,
yes.
And we have a big office in Mumbai, an office in Taiwan, Taipei, and in Tokyo. And we're also starting to gather pace in Jakarta and Indonesia as well.
Wow. How did the collaboration between BBF and UHA started? It
started back in 2016. As I said, we work around the world with a number of consultants on projects in the Middle East, in the Far East Asia, in South America. So we have a big network of collaborators, engineers, specialists, etc. We got a call from an engineer, very well engineering company, Bure Happold, from one of the partners there, George Keleris, who told us, I've got this potential client called Vadim Romanov, who is looking to do some projects in Limassol, Cyprus. And he has a very clear vision of what he wants to do, and he's very, very ambitious, but he hasn't found the right partner yet to partner up with these projects, and he's just getting started. So we thought, wow, Cyprus sounds nice, why not come down and, what's the worst thing that can happen? You get 3 days in a beautiful island. I had actually never been to Cyprus before that.
Yeah, that was about my next question, basically, yeah.
We flew down to meet with Vadim and Lefteris, actually Constantinou, went and visited these sites that they were actually, BBF was called Prime back then, that BBF had purchased, and to start to discuss the vision for these 3 projects. And each site had incredible potential.
What was your first impression?
So the first site I visited was the site of Eden Rock, and it had, it was quite a big flat site, and it was sort of inland, and it was sort of a developer's dream in terms of that it was a very big kind of rectangular plot where it's kind of tabula rasa. You can kind of do what you want. But we started looking at the areas around it. You had these beautiful orange trees, you had really beautiful vegetation, and in front of you, you had these beautiful purple trees when you looked towards the sea. We felt that something lower and closer to the ground that embraced something would be a better approach, but we weren't quite clear. Vadim had a very clear vision that he wanted to open up the site. Instead of doing smaller blocks, he wanted something that opened up like a French chateau almost, where you come in and you have this massive courtyard and you have these 2 wings that embrace it. So Eden was actually the first site we actually started drawing on with BBF.
Yeah.
The second site we visited was Sky Tower. There, Vadim said we need to do it's inland, slightly inland, so we need to do something really special. We need the tower, we need the architecture to sell. I don't want it to look like any of the other high-rise that are being launched. And we were like, wow, this is crazy, high-rise here in a Mediterranean coastal town. And at first when he told us about I want to do a high-rise, we're like, really, does that work? And then we found out about Limassol and how many high-rise buildings were happening here. And it's a very sort of interesting ecosystem here. So what we designed, again, we took inspiration from nature and designed something that would grow out of the ground to form a structure instead of just having a tower that you plonked there. And it really came out of a longer conversation with Vadim, conversation with the BBF team, and trial and error and testing different things. And I think that collaborative process of conversation and testing out ideas and has really were the foundation for us as a firm for our longer term collaboration with BBF. And I think that's what's made it so successful, in that together through dialogue and through testing things and not coming with a prescribed idea of this needs to be this, but a much more open mind, looking at the site and saying, what can this be?
Yeah.
Right? And I think Marco Polo was the last site that we saw, and probably the most kind of incredible by itself, because it's close to the sea and it's kind of overlooking the sea. And so there were all three very different characters in the plot and needed very different approaches. But we also felt that we had the opportunity there. I mean, BBF had done a number of projects before, but there were smaller kind of independent projects. We felt that with these were the first three really significant projects. We felt that there was an opportunity to create almost the identity of what BBF, or what Prime at the time would become as a developer. What do they stand for? What are their parameters? What do they believe in terms of their architecture? And I think one of the really interesting things and the great opportunities we got was that because BBF was starting off at the time, Vadim said, look, there is no proper project management firm in Cyprus operating at the moment, and we still don't have our in-house team. So I need you guys to come in and basically help me not only draw the building, but also construction manage and project manage the project. So really from the beginning to the end. Very rarely as an architect do you get the chance to really look after your baby from the beginning until it's fully grown. Vadim and I actually went and hired seasoned project managers from England, brought them back here. And this was really the birth of these three first projects.
And landmarks and rewarded from the European Union from its unique architectural shape.
I think it comes from two sides. I think there is a very clear model for what works in terms of what will, as a developer, or as an architect, it's very important to get a clear brief from the developer. But it's also very important that the developer be open to suggestions and be open to take a certain element of risk. And I think what has made BBF stand out when I compare to other developers that we've worked with, or even other developers on the island, is that there has been a certain fearlessness. So yes, there's a clarity on what people want, and we need to prioritize views, and it needs to work, and operationally it needs to work, and maintenance-wise it needs to work, and we need to provide all the basic facilities. But we're not scared of doing things slightly differently from what other people did. That takes a lot of courage. And most developers do not want to do something that hasn't been proven in the market before. They don't want to take that risk. And I think that courage started really on Sky Tower, where we came and said to Vadim and the team there, guys, it makes no sense not to use post-tensioning on this structure. They're using it in other places. It's going to make the building more efficient. It's going to make the building lighter. It's going to make it more sustainable. It's just better. There was a big reluctance at first because nobody had done it. Why is nobody else doing it on the island? And some of the local engineers were saying, no, it cannot be done on this island, blah, blah, blah. But there was this certain fearlessness. Instead of saying, no, we're just going to do it the way everybody else does it, he looked at the facts. The team looked at the facts and said, okay, we visited some buildings where it had been done, talked to specialists, and we went through the hoops and we did it. And it was a success. And after that, now every tower is post-tension after that. So that there is an element of pioneering. There's not this fear of, we shouldn't do it because nobody else has done it. The same goes for Marco. I mean, most developers, you propose a building that's leaning at 22 degrees, they'll say, are you crazy? Is this, I'm not going to take that risk. It's too dangerous. It's going to fall down. Whereas I think Vadim had the courage to say, let's do this. Let's try it. And we went for it, and it's here. And I think if you had shown us these 3 buildings on the day where I visited Cyprus with Vadim, and you showed this is what you're going to deliver here in 5 years or in 6 years, we wouldn't have believed it. We would have gone, wow, this is amazing.
Was Marco the hardest to design? Perhaps to work things out and make it happen was the hardest?
No, look, I think every building presents different challenges at different times and sometimes the challenges can be technical. How do you make this work? How do you build it in the right way? I think for a small building of this size, it was probably the most challenging technically in terms of getting it built right, in terms of working out how the building works, the 2 cores and servicing the apartments, getting it done in such a way that it works on every aspect, because you don't see many buildings. A lot of it was we had to come up with new solutions to figure out how to get this thing to work. But in terms of concept, it was actually a very clear concept. It just started from a request. I want to give people bigger balconies. And on a building where you want to give people more balconies, in Cyprus, you're allowed 25% covered veranda. So if you have a straight building and you want your balcony facing the sea, you cannot do more than 25. You just can't, unless the balcony is open to the air and open to the sky, where it doesn't count. So the simple solution to we want more balcony was to step every floor back so that every floor would get a strip of uncovered of uncovered sky, which doesn't count towards your covered veranda. And therefore, instead of 25% covered veranda, suddenly you get 35%. So you get these much larger, more generous decks. But then that presented again the challenge of, okay, if every floor steps back, you actually get a leaning building. How do we make this leaning building work? Yeah, it was a challenging feat, but also incredibly exciting. You're working on new things, you need to figure them out. And there's a lot of little things that along the way, ideas that materialize. Like one of the ideas that came up was, we want to have these cabanas that are part of the project. What if every resident could have their own cabana? It's not just, you have your actual own piece. This is not something that really had been done before. Yeah. So there's a lot of small innovation pieces that go into every building. But the same goes for, Eden. We had a unique challenge there where we were basically asked by Vadim, said, I want to maximize the amount of penthouses, where usually the penthouses are the really difficult units to sell. They're the big ticket item. Here in this case, I want lots of penthouses, which was the first. We've never had that request from a client before. So how do you then plan a building where you have lots of penthouses? And again, the idea was to step it. And on the main building itself, you get, I think it's 11 penthouses with huge terraces that are each incredible apartments, which you could never get if you just did individual towers. So it's about looking at having a developer who has a clear vision of what he wants to do, and then taking that and finding a solution for how to achieve that. And sometimes that leads to completely new design options. And I think that's why every one of these buildings looks quite different from everything else. But I think
the design tools they have is an amazing feeling. Speaking of some of the clients who own the penthouse there, they are incredibly happy because they get to experience something very unique here in Cyprus, and there's nothing to be compared to. So was the Eden Rock an inspiration from a super yacht?
I think that was part of it. I think we felt like we needed to be very maritime. I mean, Limassol is by the sea. It's a Mediterranean coastal town. So we felt that the sea was something that was very important. The same goes for Marco. The way it's designed, the gentle curves. We wanted to make it feel like it had been almost shaped by the wind and the sea. And when you see pebbles on the beach, the pebbles they kind of get round, through attrition of rolling. So it's shaped by the sea. So you get these smoother curves. And inevitably, we look at what is very luxurious and on the sea, and you see these amazing, incredible super yachts. I grew up in the south of France, so we would go down to Antibes, that has some of the biggest super yachts in the world, and look at them and said, wow, wouldn't this be amazing? And I think one of the most used places on the super yacht is the decks at the back, where you sit and you have your dinner and you kind of enjoy the maritime living. And it said, what if a building could give you these sort of decks that you have on a super yacht, where you come out and you have your dining table, but you maybe have a pool as well, and these incredible, the mega yachts that have pools on the back decks. And we said, what if we could do this for an apartment? So these were that was where the inspiration of the super yacht came, and you can see a little bit of the language of the kind of white horizontal bands and how that shaped it. So yeah, I think definitely even, the super yacht was definitely one of the big drivers of the early inspiration of how could this building look.
Yeah.
But also the sea and kind of the idea of creating this big community space. And, I spoke to you a little bit earlier about how I grew up in this, very modest house, but we had our own little garden. And then the garden opened up to a bigger green public space. And that is exactly what happens at Eden, where the ground floor maisonettes actually have their own garden that open up to a bigger communal space. So you're creating community there. And I think I spoke about courage. This actual type of unit where, most of the buildings at the time were just using stilts. So you had parking underneath the building. In this case, we didn't want to have parking underneath the building. We wanted it to be vehicular free. We didn't want any cars in the center. So we said, what if the units are like maisonettes where you get your own garden and then that spills out? And then you could even have your own parking at the base. So it became this triple height maisonettes. And at first there was, there's not such a unit. We don't know if it's going to sell. It's a bit, will people like this here in Cyprus? It's not your typical unit. And again, here there was the courage to say, okay, let's try it. It makes sense. And they actually became, by the end of the project, yes, it took a little bit of time for people to realize what is this, but by the end of the project became one of the most successful unit types on Eden Rock.
That's right.
So I think this is again and again and again when we work with BBF and we kind of try to look at things a little bit differently, but we're not just pitching things out. It's coming from a very real challenge or vision where we say, let's, how can we come up with something that works for, this local condition?
And that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed getting a real look into how we think, build, and design. Thanks to Jonas, and thanks to you for being part of this.